love you all. Sing with me. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da da da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 da. So I was on the plane, and I was trying to decide whether I had the courage to sing, and because I haven't done this in a group like this before, and so I'm singing along. I thought very quietly, and the woman across the aisle from me said, "That's so beautiful. It's so calming." And so I got inspired to do what Reb Zalman does when he starts a presentation or a meeting, is to get everybody singing a wordless melody together, because singing together is one of the most beautiful ways to uplift the community. I want to bless the memory of Reb Zalman. I want to bless the memory of his sidekick, Reb Shlomo. May his memory be for healing and a blessing, whose anniversary of his death is today. I want to bless the memory of all of our ancestors, each of our ancestors, from the mother line and from the father line. And as I've learned from my friends, my Native American friends, to tell them, please be among us now. We are in need of you now. We are really in need of you now. I want to honor Rebbetzin Eve Ilson, you know, the widow of Reb Zalman, who all of us who knew Reb Zalman well knows that not only was she his friend, his mentor, his teacher, and his student, but also she more than anyone sustained him and helped him reach almost his 90th year, a month away from his 90th year. I want to honor my wife Debbie, who I wish was here tonight. You know, I have a story about Debbie. Years ago, when I first started in this work, there was a woman named Carol Winograd, a Robert Wood Johnson clinical fellow, and she blessed us by coming to work with us. And one day she was talking to a friend of hers, a woman named Roz Lindheim, and Roz had just convinced the president of the University of California to do a conference out of his office on humanized healthcare. And she said to Debbie, she said, I'm sorry, I'm a little, you know, it's age. So she said to Carol, whenever I do a conference, I need a wild card. And Carol said, boy, have I got a wild card for you. So it was me. And she called me on the phone and told me about the conference and asked if I would deliver a paper that would be printed in the proceedings. And I came home and I bragged to Debbie about this great conference, and I told the woman, I don't write papers. You know, I'm an old hippie. And I told her that she can have somebody take notes and they could print that in the proceedings. And Debbie said, are you out of your mind? She said, this is one of the most prestigious universities in the whole world, a conference out of the office of the president, and you're too good to write a paper? You will write a paper. I said, no, I don't write papers. She said, you will write a paper. I protested one more time and I went to work and wrote a paper. And that paper was picked up by Aging magazine, which is now defunct, as the cover article. And in it, I talked about how what our work was about was creating a new culture to transform aging, to transform in those times, to transform long-term care. And that article became the keynote for how we organized the Pioneer Network and the culture change movement in aging. And it may not have happened that way if Debbie didn't say to me, "You will write a paper." So tonight,
where's your paper?
it's archived somewhere, and but the important thing is that tonight we're talking about channeling Reb Zalman. It's not woo-woo. You know, each and every one of us has the capacity to communicate with people in other dimensions, to have a transdimensional conversation. And it's as simple as just inviting the conversation and then letting it come through to us in our dreams, in the way we think, in the way we respond, in the way we act. And so I want everybody here to be empowered to have that conversation. Just remember one thing: don't fetch. Does anybody know what that word means? You know, don't complain. And because in the other realms, they're past that. They're past the complaining. I could tell you a woo story. You know, Elana Shachter, the mother of Zalman's 3 youngest children, once told me that Zalman was in Brooklyn visiting, and he walked by a telephone in the street. In those days, we had phone booths. Remember phone booths? And she passed by a phone booth, and the phone was ringing, and she said, "Zalman can never pass a phone without answering it." He picked up the phone, and the voice on the other end said, "Hello, Zalman?" The guy knew the numbers, and he was in the middle of a psychotic episode. And he talked to Zalman about coming to New York to bring the Messiah by killing Reb Zalman's teacher. And Reb Zalman said to him, "Look," got very serious. Reb Zalman, we all see those pictures of him in his light side. He has this very serious, very focused, and he said, "Look, go to," and I don't remember the name of the monastery outside of Winnipeg where he lived, "and go to the abbot and tell him that I want him to give you sanctuary until I get back." So later on I said to Zalman, "So what happened? Did he go to the abbot?" And Zalman said, "No, he got arrested because he was going around downtown Winnipeg, going up to people, putting his finger on their noses and saying, 'Light up, light up.'" So when Reb Zalman came to Berkeley, and I met him for the first time in 1973, one of the things he was teaching about is the paradigm shift. We are right now at the cusp of the paradigm shift. You're moving from the old paradigm of domination and exploitation to the new paradigm in which we are all connected, and that we are all connected to our Mother Earth, and is all one living organism. I had an experience which may have been my second transdimensional conversation, in which I was sitting under an oak tree in Live Oak Park in Oakland, minding my own business, when I heard a voice inside of my head that said, "Okay, wise guy, who are you And what are you here to do? And I recognized that voice because once I was in a car accident in Vermont and I was lying in a field and I felt myself leave my body and go to a distant place, and I heard this voice within my voice saying, "Is it time yet?" And that voice that challenged me said, "No, it's not, go back." And so then in response to that question, the inner voice of my inner voice said, "I'm here to be and I say a, because we're all part of this, a midwife of the paradigm shift." And so I said, "Well, how would I go about doing that?" And the voice said to me, "Work to transform the role of elder in the culture." Now, I was a young dude. I was in my mid-30s, having that delayed adolescent that we had in those days. And it wasn't long before that we said, don't trust anybody over 30. Remember that? And I said, okay, I got my marching orders, but I said, how would I do that? And I remembered my grandmother, who Lynn described, and my grandmother was languishing in a nursing home. I remember my last visit with her, and she said to me, she had a lot of a Yiddish accent. She said, Barry, you don't know how bad it is here. You don't know how they treat me." So here I was, a young activist, and I said, "Don't worry, Grandma, I'll go talk to them and get it straightened out." And she said, "Barry, please." She was terrified. She said, "Barry, please, don't do that. You're going to get in your car, you're going to go back to Richmond, Virginia, and you're going to leave me to have to deal with it." And if I ever had a moment of wisdom, it was when I said, "Okay, Grandma." But on the way back to Richmond, it dawned on me that she was suffering from a disease of the culture. And it was manifested in isolation. She was isolated from the people on either side of her. She was disconnected from the flow of her life. Nobody knew who she was before, and nobody cared. And certainly there wasn't an after. And lack of meaning in her life. And so I began thinking about that and thinking about what the thing I needed to do was. And I decided that I needed to go into a nursing home and to begin to change the culture. And I recruited my friend Bob, and every day for a year, we went to Live Oak Park in Berkeley, where I sat under the oak tree minding my business. And we began thinking about what this culture might look like. And the first thing was that we needed to move from a model of seeing old age as an illness to seeing old age as a time of possibility, even among those who were the most injured, even amongst those who were the most in despair. And so Bob and I decided to do this. And we went to talk to a guy. He headed the Jewish home in Oakland, and he said, "I would love to have you do this because there are changes I would like to make, but I'm powerless to make myself." And so we figured that the first thing we had to do was to move from the image of people being patients to being the elders of the people. And so Lynn quoted a lot from the definition of an elder. And we went to a sign painter, and we had because there was no Kinko's, and we had a sign painted and hung it on the wall with the definition of an elder on it. And we began every day to get the people together and to weave a new culture. And recently I read or actually I watched a video of a dude. His name is Professor Umberto Maturana from Chile. And he said human beings are biocultural organisms. And this is the most important thing, that we are organisms growing in relationship to the culture. And the work we did there really demonstrated that in a very profound way, but it took a little while. So Reb Zalman came to visit us. We were like 3 weeks into the project. And he came and he visited our daily community meeting that Bob and I held with the residents. And afterwards, Reb Zalman said to me, "Oi, Barry, this is so hard." It was the first time I ever heard, and the only time I ever heard Zalman despair a little bit. And he said, "This is so hard. You know, why don't you," and he was always concerned with my livelihood. He said, "Why don't you do something that can make a living that's easier?" I said, "Don't worry, Zalman, it's going to be okay." And every day we went, and people began to change, and they began to take on new roles, and they began to call themselves the Council of Elders, and they began to impact the way the institution did things. They impacted the capital budget according to their needs as they defined it. They challenged the White House Conference on Aging locally. It was amazing. And when Zalman came back 6 months later, he was blown away. And I think that was one of the main experiences that helped him to see the potential of all of us as we age. And so I want to talk a little bit about Reb Zalman's model for saging. You know, Reb Zalman comes from the Hasidic tradition. And within the Hasidic tradition, there were these people who were called Rebbes. That's where Reb Zalman comes from, Rebbe. And a Rebbe was not a rabbi necessarily, could have been, but often was not. And the Rebbe took responsibility for the well-being of whatever community came together around that person, and was concerned with the physical well-being, the spiritual well-being, the emotional well-being, dealt with family crises, dealt with people's livelihood issues, dealt with all kinds of issues in their lives. And that was the model that Reb Zalman had as he began to conceive of the whole idea of saging. And how am I doing for time, Rains?
Good.
Good? So, in that case, I'd like to tell you Reb Zalman's favorite story. You know, about what happened in our project at the old home for Jewish parents. You know, we were there for a couple months, and it was one of those times when nobody died for a while. And then one day, as we approached the home, what's the start time on that clock?
A quarter past is the end time. So.
Quarter past, thank you. Timing is not my strong suit. I can go on forever. So there was a person who died, and everybody said to us, "Did you hear? Did you hear? Did you hear the news?" As Bob and I came in there, Mr. Marcus died last night. Now, if central casting was to pick somebody to die, it was Mr. Marcus, because he was so beloved. He sat at the table, at the head of a table, and everybody walked by him and rubbed his shoulder as they walked by. And I often thought that if it was a statue, a bronze statue, his shoulder would shine. And so Mr. Marcus died, and we came to the community meeting, and we said, "What do you do here when somebody dies?" Well, they wheel them out the back door, and they take the name off the door, and they don't tell us because they don't want to upset the old people, as if we never think about dying. So what would you like to do? And everybody was unanimous. We want to have a memorial service. And okay, so who should lead it? And someone said, "Let's get a rabbi." And in those days, rabbis didn't come around old age homes all that much. Now, almost everyone has a rabbi in residence. And someone else said, a rabbi's like a cop. There's never one around when you need one. So we designed a memorial service, and one of the important things was the statement that said that if you don't remember somebody when they die, then their life here is meaningless. And so as we're designing the memorial service, somebody mentioned a prayer for the dead. It's called El Malay Rachamim, merciful God in heaven, take in your hands the soul of the departed. And the question was asked, well, who shall lead it? And there was one guy who never said anything. It was assumed that he had some degree or another of cognitive loss. And he said, I will lead it. And other people said, you can't lead it. You can't remember anything. And he said, I will lead it. And so after discussion, we decided there would be a backup. We didn't decide, the community decided, and that he would say it. And when the memorial service came, he sang this prayer from such a deep place that it cracked my heart right open. I could imagine the merciful God in heaven really, really hearing this and responding to this. And afterwards, and this is what Bob loved, what Zalman loved so much, afterwards there was a woman there, hadn't said very much, and she walked up to Bob and she said, Mister, you do this for women too? And Bob said, we do it for everybody. And a week later she died. Now, who knows? Who knows? It's all about mystery. This is what this work is about, is mystery and the mysterious. One of the things about Reb Zalman's model of the Rebbe is that what Zalman did is he opened the doors of knowledge to people anybody who wanted it. So in traditional Judaism, the Kabbalah, which is the mystical source of Judaism, the mystical tradition, that you're not supposed to study it until you've mastered all the major books and are over 40 years old and raised a family and all that. And Zalman said, no, I'm going to make this available to everybody. And Zalman sought to demystify the role of Rebbe, so that each and every one of us could begin to, who was willing to do the work, would begin to see in ourselves the potential for taking responsibility wherever we were for the physical and mental and emotional and spiritual well-being of whoever you encountered, wherever your community was. And in a way, this model became the model for our work as we sought to become community developers. You notice we wanted to demystify the language and not make it lofty, to be the community developers who created the communities that were transformational in the culture change that we were seeking to do within the homes in which we operate. At this stage of the game, I need notes. One of the things that's so major is that in the Hasidic tradition, Zalman taught with stories. And that's how we began to understand, what this world was like. You have to understand, Reb Zalman was born in Europe as as the great darkness descended for the Jewish people within, and many other people, by the way, within Europe, and millions and millions and millions of people died. And all of that existed in the Eastern European Jewish community. There was an incredible community going on there, was destroyed. And so Zalman was an ambassador to bring that. He was a living bridge to bring that culture to those of us who were into all different kinds of spiritual experience, into various movements, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, to people who were into all the variety of religious experience that came from the East and was now flowering in the West. And Zalman took it upon himself as the mission to be the living bridge of that tradition. And he did it a lot through the telling of stories. And if the clock wasn't winding down, I'd tell you a few whoppers, but maybe we can do it at another time over lunch or something. So I'd like to talk to you about some of the messages I got from Zalman. So I said to Zalman, I guess a few months ago, when Marianne invited me to give this talk, and I said, oh, I'll call it Channeling Reb Zalman. And so then I began having this conversation with Reb Zalman. And, you know, and in these conversations, in these trans-dimensional conversations, it's hard to tell where one of us ends and the other one of us begins. And so the first thing that Reb Zalman wanted me to say about that is that I got the title wrong. It's not about being a sage. You know, being a sage is something people call us, but we're involved in the process of saging. And that Zalman loved verbs. He loved to take nouns and turn them into verbs, because he believed everything is about action. Everything is about action. And so God became Godding. God is in the process of Godding, and we enter into that relationship with God when we pray, enabling God to do her work of Godding through within us. Togethering. You know, Zalman used to say the only way to get it together is together, and the way we do it is by togethering. We don't want to be an elder, we want to go through the process of eldering. So that's the first thing that we need to know, is that saging is a verb. And as we're saging, we need to shift, and this is very important in this age. We're at the time when everything can turn on a dime. We are at that critical moment in human evolution when everything can change on a dime. And so as we're involved in this process of saging, we have to be connected to the source of all life, and we need to get out of the way. We need to get out of the way as we go about this. We have to learn to humble ourselves. This is about humility. And as we humble ourselves, we have to be, and this is the second message, we need to be more than we have ever been. We need to forget our history, forget our limitations, and be open to all the possibilities within us, because not only, as we say to the ancestors, we are in need of we are in need of you now. We are in need of who we are now. We are in need of who we are in our most quintessential self at this very moment. The third message was cultivate our joy. Zalman taught me a song. Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav used to say, friends, do not despair. A difficult time is upon us. Joy must fill the air. That was not so good, but you got the message. You got the message. You know, I was in the pool the other day. I was just telling Ben I was in the pool the other day. I've been doing laughing yoga. Anybody ever hear of laughing yoga? It's my spiritual practice now. And so I'm in the pool, and I don't swim. I only walk and dance in the water and all of that in the Y. And I was laughing and laughing and laughing, and there's a woman at the end of the pool, and she's moving. I never saw anybody move so vigorously. And I said, wow, you must have some workout. And she said, it's the only way I can get rid of the stress. And I said to her, did you try laughing? And she said, I could never laugh. I said, oh, I was laughing down at the other end of the pool, and I was laughing so hard people thought I was the village idiot. And she started to laugh. But the greatest laugher I know was Reb Zalman. Did anybody ever hear him laugh? You can see it on YouTube. Deep, deep from inside of him, he would laugh. And it was like a transformational experience being with Reb Zalman when he laughed. I wonder if you'll all laugh with me a little bit. Cultivate our joy. Laugh without reason. Because what it does is it changes our brain waves. And we're able to break out of the constant flow of negative information that you know, the media is owned by Wall Street. Does anybody not know that? You know, and they're trying to control our minds with all of this da-da, and all this happened bad, that happened bad. They didn't say anything about this meeting here and how high it is and the elder revolution that's going on. They're talking about, I don't want to say his name. So the next piece of wisdom. Do I have your permission to go about 6 minutes over? Yes. So the next piece of wisdom is look beyond the present moment. I'm putting you on the spot and asking that question, but I don't care. So look beyond the present moment. There's a Hasidic story. There was this dude, he was called the Seer of Lublin, and he could see into the future. And they say he had one eye sort of closed and the other eye open, and people would come to him. And so there's one guy who lived in a village, and he leased an inn from what they called the Poritz, who was like the landowner who had control over people's lives. And this dude who was the inn manager, operator, he was in arrears in his rent to the Poritz. And the Poritz said to him, Moshe, if you don't come up with the money you owe me by Monday, I'm going to beat you and whip you until you die. And Moshe was in complete despair. And his wife said to him, write a note, because that's the way they communicated to the Rebbe. Go see the seer and write him a note to ask him what to do. And so, being an illiterate guy, he wrote a big note on a big sheet of paper, he put it in his jacket, he took his shoes off and threw them over his shoulder to walk the distance to Lublin, the city of Lublin, where the seer was. He took his shoes off because he didn't want to wear out the shoe leather. No, that's no joke, it's real serious, you know. Those were real days of poverty. And he on the way, the seer had a student, he was called the Rubshitzer. And this student was kind of an arrogant guy. And he encountered Moshe as he's going to see the seer. And he says, where are you going? And Moshe says, I'm going to see the seer. And the Reb Shachter says, is that they called it a kvittel, the question that they're sending to the Rebbe. And he says, is that a kvittel in your pocket? And Moshe said, yes. And without waiting for a response, he said, may I look at it? And he looked at it and he said, oh no. Go home, pack your things, and run away as fast as you can. And Moshe was terrified, but he said, I'm going to go see the seer. And he went to see the seer, and the seer looked at the kvittel, and his one eye got low, and the other eye got large, and he said, when the poritz asks you to come to him, tell him you'll only do it if he gives you 25,000 rubles. So Moshe goes home and he's confused and doesn't know what to do. And as it happens in crises, before you know it, it's Monday. Moshe is walking down the road on the way to the marketplace. The poritz comes in his wagon, in his coach. He jumps out, grabs the whip from the coachman, and starts to beat him and beat him and beat him. And here's Moshe bloody. And he crawls home. And his wife is giving him first aid to the best way she could. In the meanwhile, Moshe, the poritz goes home. And his wife said to him, I didn't see Moshe at the marketplace today. I love Moshe because he always helps me in the marketplace find the best deals on everything and find the freshest fruit and vegetables. And the poritz said, you'll never see Moshe again. I think I killed him. And she said, you what? You killed my favorite Jew? You better make sure that he's okay and he comes to me. So the poritz goes running on his horse to Moshe's house. And he's pounding on the door and he's saying, Moshe, let me in, let me in. And Moshe remembers what the seer said to him. And he said, I'll only let you in if you give me 25,000 rubles. And the poritz said, I'll lend it to you. So a year later, Moshe, who really was good at buying and selling, was a rich man. And he had his own coach. And his wife said to him, you know, you never went to thank the seer. And he said, that's right. And so he put his kids who were well dressed and his wife, and they got into the coach and they went to see the seer, and the seer knew exactly what was happening. And Moshe said to him, tell me, how did you know? How did you know to ask for the 25,000 rubles when the Reb Shachter said I should run away? And the seer said to him, the Reb Shachter could only see what happens next. I could see what happens after what happens next. And in this day and age, when everything is so perilous, we can't be fixated on the logics of what's happening next. We have to develop the eyes to see beyond what happens next. The next thing that Reb Zalman passed on to me is be deployed. You know, Reb Zalman called me one time and said, Barry Laban, I'm not gonna travel anymore. And then a few months later he said, Barry Laban, guess what? Eve and I are going to New Zealand and to Australia. And I said, Zalman, I thought you said you're not traveling anymore. And he said, I feel like I'm being deployed. And we now have to, and this is really a deep blessing for all of us here, that we go home knowing more deeply, more profoundly what our deployment is and follow our deployment. Last message that Reb Zalman wanted me to share with you. Whatever month you're in, make your own project. You know, there's this wonderful book about Reb Zalman. It's called The December Project. And in the December of Reb Zalman's life, he saw our lives in periods like the month. I'm doing my October project. And so Reb Zalman was working very hard in his December project to leave his body in a way that went directly to the one he served all his life. Now, as he was training to do that, he didn't give up his deployment. So he went to Hartford, Connecticut, to do a teaching for a holiday, a Jewish holiday called Shavuos. And just as he finished, his body gave out. And they rushed him to the hospital. And he was on life support. This is a story I heard from his son, Sholem. And he was on life support. And Sholem lived and with his wife Marcy, they lived in Toronto, and they drove nonstop down to Hartford, and they're in Reb Zalman's room in the intensive care unit with Eve, and the doctors come in and say, you know, it's really time to take him off life support. And there's a 14-second period in which we're going to know whether he's going to breathe on his own or not. May have been 24 seconds. I don't remember. They took him off life support. And after a few seconds, Zalman sits upright and he starts praying the Modeh Ani, the morning prayer, thanking God for restoring his soul. And then he begins to recite from heart Psalms. And when he was finished reciting the Psalms, he looked over at his wife, Eve, and he said, Chavala, what's happening? Where am I? So we should know what month we're in our life, and we should do the work of that month of our life. And if you want to know more about that, there's Zalman's first book, on aging, called From Aging to Saging. So, I want to bless us all. First of all, I want to bless us all with good health and regenerativity and resilience. And that no matter what happens, to remember that even when we can't remember anymore, to remember that we are filled with the spirit of life and love and light and beauty and grace and meaning. And that we should remember that we are the elders of the people, and that the people have need of us. They have need of us to rise up, to stand together and alone wherever we are, and take responsibility for what it is that we're doing with our lives and for future generations. And to do it with heart, and to do it with kindness, and to not turn our backs on anybody. And as we walk down the street,